build confidence. Obviously, we reached a stage wherein the situation has affected all aspects of life. We are overwhelmed by the flood of information all around. This has in effect created a sense of uncertainty and put all of us in a vulnerable position. But we must not allow COVID to take away the very way of life of our citizens, nor take away the hope from us that we will overcome this together. There is no such thing as too much caution or too much preparation, and therefore we must be fully prepared. For all of us, the global COVID crisis revealed three fundamental issues that are common challenges. We ask ourselves, how will we be better prepared, provide stronger frontline support? How do we build more robust coordination in all fronts? How do we keep our guard up in the months ahead and balance life in the new normal? And on sufficiency, how do we adjust ourselves to live without the overindulgence of the pre-COVID world? And there are underlying challenges of producing a vaccine, of boosting the post-COVID economy in the long term towards a future of global sustainability. Fighting COVID is now a global social responsibility, not only as citizens of your own countries, but as citizens of the world. It takes leadership and sacrifice and discipline from all of us. It is often said that in times of crisis, the true character of a person is revealed. We will together show the world our character. Have faith in each other, and wherever you call home, let's re-emerge stronger and better. We've learned many lessons, and next time around, we hope to improve and take crisis communication to a whole new level. This is all I have for the English language summary of the daily press briefing for today. We'll see you again on Monday. Have a very pleasant afternoon. Please keep tab of the news and the announcement over the weekend. So hope for your full cooperation until then and beyond. So thank you very much. Sawasdee krap.
Events happen around us all the time, in our community, in our country, around the world. Events that affect people, move communities, or simply inspire us. Interesting events that people need to know. In these interesting times, we continue to be a competent partner in delivering news about these events. Fast, accurate, balanced. Eagle News, because we live in interesting times.
Hello, I'm Alma Angeles, and you're watching Eagle News International.
And I'm CJ Hero. Welcome to the program. On tonight's headlines.
Scientists at the World Health Organization warn that mass vaccination efforts will not bring about herd immunity from the coronavirus this year, even as one leading producer boosts its production forecast.
U.S. Acting Homeland Security Secretary Chad Wolf announced his resignation unexpectedly as worries rose over more violence during President-elect Joe Biden's inauguration next week.
President Donald Trump and Vice President Mike Pence met on Monday for the first time since rioters stormed the U.S. Capitol last week, signaling a united front as Democratic efforts to impeach Trump gain momentum.
And a black box from the crashed Indonesian passenger jet has been recovered, officials said, a discovery that could offer critical clues to explaining why the plane with 62 people aboard slammed into the sea.
First, scientists at the World Health Organization warned that mass vaccination efforts will not bring about herd immunity from the coronavirus this year, even as one leading producer boosts its production forecast. The WHO's chief scientist, Soumya Swaminathan, warned that it would take time to produce and give enough shots to halt the spread of the virus, which has infected more than 90 million people worldwide, with deaths now approaching 2 million.
So we have to be a little bit patient. The vaccines are going to come. They're going to go to all countries. But meanwhile, we mustn't forget that there are measures that work. And as Mike was saying, I think it's really important to remind people, both governments as well as individuals, on the responsibilities and the measures that we continue to need to practice for the next, well, for the rest of this year at least, because even as vaccines start protecting the most vulnerable, we're not going to achieve any levels of population immunity or herd immunity in 2021. And even if it happens in a couple of pockets in a few countries, it's not going to protect people across the world.
Scientists typically estimate that a vaccination rate of about 70% is needed for herd immunity, where entire populations are protected against a disease. But some fear that the extremely infectious nature of COVID-19 would require a significantly higher threshold. Meanwhile, Dr. Bruce Aylward, an advisor to WHO's Director General, said the UN Health Agency was hoping coronavirus vaccinations might begin later this month or in February in some of the world's poorest countries, calling on the global community to do more to ensure that all countries have access to vaccines.
I think everyone on the call is aware, over 40 countries have now begun vaccinating against COVID-19 using 5 different COVID vaccines. However, all of that vaccination, or virtually all of it, as the Director General has emphasized, were in the high-income and upper-middle-income countries so far. We're working very hard, as we've discussed at last week's press conference, to try and accelerate now the rollout of vaccines through the COVAX facility, and especially for the AMC countries. We expect and we have strong confidence that we should be able to be vaccinating in February in these countries, and we're doing everything possible to make sure in as many countries as possible, but we cannot do that on our own. We require the cooperation of vaccine manufacturers to prioritize deliveries to the COVAX facility. We require the cooperation of our financiers to see through the financing necessary, and we require the cooperation, as Dr. Tedros said, of those key suppliers to make sure that we have the necessary data to ensure these vaccines meet all of the criteria necessary in terms of efficacy, safety, and quality. Now, we are also looking, are there some extraordinary things we could do to even bring that timeline a little bit further ahead? And we have a great ambition, actually, to try and do something even in January. But again, there requires the cooperation of a lot of other players, particularly the suppliers, to prioritize the COVAX facility, and not the COVAX facility, but really the AMC countries to be receiving vaccines, because right now we have an inequitable situation where vaccines are going to high-income countries, upper-middle-income countries, and not yet to the lowest-income countries.
Experts are also concerned about the rapid spread of new variants of the virus, such as the one first detected in Britain, which is feared to be significantly more transmissible. Dr. Michael Ryan, WHO's emergency chief, said while there's some evidence variants may be speeding the spread of the infection, there's no evidence that variants are driving any element of severity. Take a look.
U.S. Acting Homeland Security Secretary Chad Wolf announced his resignation unexpectedly as worries rose over more violence during President-elect Joe Biden's inauguration next week. Wolf's departure as head of the body in charge of security for the January 20 event came 5 days after President Donald Trump's supporters stormed the U.S. Capitol, hoping to prevent Biden from replacing him. But the move did not end questions over whether the U.S. capital city would be adequately secure over the coming week. An internal FBI document warned of the possibility that armed Trump supporters could hold protests in all 50 states between the coming weekend and January 20, according to U.S. media. The White House issued a statement saying that Trump had declared that an emergency exists in the District of Columbia and ordered federal assistance to supplement the district's response efforts due to the emergency conditions resulting from the 59th presidential inauguration from January 11 to January 24. It said the order gave the Department of Homeland Security the authority to act to save lives and to protect property and public health and safety, and to lessen or avert the threat of a catastrophe in the District of Columbia.
I'm not afraid of taking the oath outside, and we've been getting briefed, but I think it's critically important that there be a real serious focus on holding those folks who engaged in sedition and threatened people's lives, defaced public property, caused great damage, that they be held accountable.
U.S. President-elect Joe Biden's inauguration will seek to foster national unity, organizers said Monday, as fears of renewed violence prompted the Pentagon to authorize a surge of troops ahead of the event. About 15,000 members of the National Guard have been readied for deployment, with 6,200 already on the ground in Washington following mob violence that broke out at the Capitol last week.
Meanwhile, a Democratic member of the U.S. House of Representatives said she had tested positive for COVID-19 after sheltering during the violent storming of the Capitol with several other lawmakers who declined to wear masks. I received a positive test result for COVID-19 and am home resting at this time, according to Representative Bonnie Watson Coleman of New Jersey in a statement. She also said, while I am experiencing mild cold-like symptoms, I remain in good spirits and will continue to work on behalf of my constituents, the 75-year-old Watson Coleman said. Watson Coleman's office said she believes she was exposed during protective isolation in the U.S. Capitol building as a result of insurrectionist riots. U.S. lawmakers were locked down for several hours in the Capitol after it was stormed by a mob of supporters of President Trump who were seeking to disrupt the certification of Biden's election victory. Several conservative Republican lawmakers were seen in footage released online declining an offer to put on masks while they were sheltering in a committee room from the rioters. Asked on Monday about their behavior, President-elect Joe Biden said, "I think it's irresponsible."
Now, President-elect Joe Biden, who is to take office on January 20th, made the remarks to reporters while receiving his second vaccination on Monday in Wilmington, Delaware. He said that getting vaccines into people's arms would be a #1 priority for his incoming administration. Watch this.
3,000 to 4,000 people a day dying is just beyond the pale. It's just wrong. And we can do a lot to change it. #1, it's going to be hard. It's not going to be easy, but we can get it done.
It comes as vaccine rollout has faltered badly in the world's hardest hit country, where some 375,000 people have died from the coronavirus and about 3,000 more are dying every day. Some 25.5 million first doses of COVID vaccines have been shipped out to hospitals, clinics, and nursing homes across the country, but only around 9 million have been injected, according to official data. Biden has also pledged to push for more direct stimulus checks to taxpayers and said he was speaking with Republican lawmakers about moving on a second package sooner rather than later.
Cause great damage, that they be held accountable.
Meanwhile, President Donald Trump and Vice President Mike Pence met on Monday for the first time since rioters stormed the U.S. Capitol last week, signaling a united front as Democratic efforts to impeach Trump gain momentum. The meeting in the Oval Office, described as a good conversation by a senior official, came ahead of a critical 48-hour period when Pence will come under pressure to break from the president and initiate his removal. Just 8 days before his term ends and nearly a week after a failed insurrection scarred the seat of America's democracy, Trump heads to Texas on Tuesday in one of his final trips as president, desperate to reach friendlier territory so he can tout his administration's successes. In Washington, though, he is the target of efforts to remove him from power, including a historic second impeachment, this time for incitement of insurrection over his supporters' deadly breach of the Capitol building. First, the House of Representatives will vote Tuesday on a long-shot bid to get Pence and the cabinet to invoke the U.S. Constitution's 25th Amendment, which would declare Trump unfit to perform his duties and install Pence as acting president. Pence's meeting with Trump appeared to quash any prospects of that outcome. The two men reiterated that those who broke the law and stormed the Capitol last week do not represent the America First movement backed by 75 million Americans and pledged to continue the work on behalf of the country for the remainder of their term, according to the official.
Now, in the Republican-controlled Senate, which is on recess until January 19, top Democrat Chuck Schumer is said to be considering a rarely used maneuver to force the chamber back into session under emergency circumstances to more quickly open an impeachment trial. Democrats began the process of impeaching President Donald Trump for a second time, introducing a resolution calling on Vice President Mike Pence to invoke the 25th Amendment of the Constitution and remove Trump from the White House.
For what purpose does the gentleman from West Virginia?
I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on the Judiciary.
There's no official timeline, so it's unclear how fast the House could use to start and end this in a matter of hours if they wanted, but certainly in a day or two. Of course, this would stifle debate and might lead to criticism.
I will faithfully execute
the office of President of the United States.
The office of President of the United States.
An impeachment without a conviction or without a conviction before he leaves office would be largely symbolic. Without a conviction, they can't really do anything. And as we saw last year, impeaching a president and not convicting him has no effect on his powers at all.
They've been trying to impeach Trump for the last 4 years, and he has still accomplished more than they have. And go Donald Trump.
Concerning the impeachment process, I think it's a waste of time. It's less than 2 weeks before the new president is installed, and so there's not enough time for a trial and a conviction of any kind. And there's not an impeachable offense.
Democrats are hoping this will be the last nail in the coffin of Donald Trump ever running for office again.
The Senate is now ready to vote on the articles of impeachment.
Be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors, close quote.
The main issue is not on the House side, it's on the Senate side. The Senate is not around. They're not scheduled to come back until the 19th. And so there's really nothing forcing them to do anything quicker than that.
To other news now, Malaysia's king declared a nationwide state of emergency Tuesday to fight a coronavirus surge, and parliament was suspended, with critics charging it was a bid by the unstable government to cling to power. It is the first time that Malaysia has declared a national state of emergency in over half a century, and Prime Minister Muhyiddin, in a televised address, confirmed parliament would be suspended and elections would not take place for the time being. But the leader, whose 10-month-old administration is showing signs of falling apart, insisted that the civilian government will continue to function.
Baginda Yang di-Tuan Agong, let me assure you that the civilian government will continue to function. The emergency proclaimed by the Yang di-Tuan Agong is not a military coup, and curfew will not be enforced. Now, to all the stakeholders keenly monitoring what is happening in Malaysia, I emphasize that Malaysia is open for business. In facing these challenging times, this period of emergency will give us much needed calm and stability, as well as.
Now, the announcement came after Muhyiddin's key coalition allies started withdrawing support, which could have led to the collapse of the government and snap national polls that some feared could worsen the outbreak. Prime Minister Muhyiddin has narrowly survived a series of challenges in parliament since taking office, but is now thought to have lost his majority. Malaysia kept the virus in check for much of last year with a tough lockdown, but once curbs were eased, cases accelerated and have repeatedly hit fresh records in recent days. The country has reported more than 138,000 virus cases and 555 deaths. The country has reported
Meanwhile, China and 4 other countries have been included on the Philippines list of countries or jurisdictions covered by a temporary travel restriction to prevent the spread of a variant of coronavirus, according to Malacanang. In a regular virtual palace press briefing, presidential spokesperson Harry Roque said the office of the executive secretary released the additional countries that also include Pakistan, Jamaica, Luxembourg, and Oman. Listen to this.
From the Office of the Executive Secretary, kasama na po ang People's Republic of China, Pakistan, Jamaica, Luxembourg, and Oman sa mga bansa na meron pong bagong COVID-19 variant, at pinagbabawal po ang pagpasok ng mga dayuhan galing sa mga bansang ito na galing po doon sa mga lugar na yon, effective January 13, 2021 at noon, 12:01 p.m. until January 15, 2021, subject po to further recommendation of the IATF. At itong travel ban, well, hindi po travel ban, travel restriction na ito ay jointly recommended po by the Department of Health and the Department of Foreign Affairs. Ulitin ko po, People's Republic of China, Pakistan, Jamaica, Luxembourg, and Oman have now been included in the countries with travel restrictions. Filipinos coming from these territories can still come home, but subject to the absolute 14-day quarantine kahit anuman po ang resulta ng kanilang PCR test.
Roque earlier announced the temporary ban on the entry of foreign travelers from the United Kingdom, the United States, Portugal, India, Finland, Norway, Jordan, Brazil, Denmark, Ireland, Japan, Australia, Israel, the Netherlands, Hong Kong, Switzerland, France, Germany, Iceland, Italy, Lebanon, Singapore, Sweden, South Korea, South Africa, Canada, Spain, and Austria. Roque said Filipinos from these countries can still come home, but subject to the government's strict quarantine measures. They will be required to undergo an absolute facility-based 14-day quarantine, even if they obtain a negative reverse transcription polymerase chain reaction or RT-PCR test result. Experts said the new strain of severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2, the virus that causes coronavirus disease 2019, is nearly 70% more transmissible than the original COVID-19.
Meanwhile, in the United Kingdom, the government said people who flout virus lockdown rules are putting their lives at risk. Joining us live from London, here's Aribel Celestino. Hello, Aribel.
Hi, Alma, and yes, you're right. People who flout coronavirus lockdown rules are putting lives at risk, the British government said on Tuesday, as cases surged to record highs and rumors swirls of potentially tougher restrictions. Well, Britain is currently in its third lockdown, with schools and non-essential shops closed, as the new strain of the virus spreads rapidly across the country. Last week saw the country's worst daily case of numbers and death tolls since the start of the outbreak, and the government is considering even tougher rules, which could include increasing the distance between the people in public. Government Minister Kate Malthouse said the situation was very, very perilous, but not everyone was complying with stay-at-home orders. You know, Alma, more than 81,000 people have died and over 3 million tested positive for COVID, with restrictions imposed to curb the spread upending daily life. But evidence of people ignoring social distancing guidelines despite warnings that a new variant of the virus is highly transmissible has led to speculation rules could be toughened. Supermarket staff have voiced concerns over the risks they face during the outbreak, with Shop Workers Union ASDA urging tougher in-store measures. Retail bosses have suggested that they receive police support to help enforce measures. Britain's most senior police officer, London Metropolitan Police Commissioner Cressida Dick, said the force was now moving more quickly to enforcement against those breaking the rules. The government is banking on a huge vaccination program to help lift lockdown restrictions, which are expected to be in place at least till mid-February. Some 2.4 million people have already received jabs. Back to you, Alma.
All right. Aribel, will there be penalties for flouting lockdown measures?
Well, Alma, those who are breaking the rules and restrictions regarding COVID are more likely to get fines. In fact, in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland, fines start at £200. However, in Scotland, they are lowered. Big parties or celebration can be closed down by the police with fines that could reach up to £10,000. However, as mentioned earlier, Cressida Dick said that the act of enforcement was common sense rather than a show of dictatorial policing. Back to you, Alma.
All right. Thank you very much, Aribel. I hope I could see you, but I think we're having some technical problems. But then thank you. Stay safe always.
Thank you so much for having me. Reporting from the United Kingdom, I am Aribel Celestino, and we live in interesting times.
Meanwhile, in other news, Japan is working to isolate and analyze a new variant of the coronavirus detected in 4 people who arrived from Brazil, a health ministry official said on Tuesday. Japan announced the detection of the new variant on Sunday, but officials have been at pains to emphasize there is no evidence yet that it is any more transmissible or dangerous than others. A health ministry official told AFP, in order to further analyze the variant, we need to isolate it first. It's hard to say right now when we can release the details, he said, adding the process could take weeks or months. The variant was found in 2 adults and 2 children who arrived in Japan on January 2 from Brazil. The health ministry said one of the 4, a man in his 40s, has been hospitalized with breathing difficulties, while a woman and a male child developed mild symptoms and a female child was asymptomatic. The World Health Organization said Monday it has been notified by Japan about the new variant, warning the more the virus spreads, the higher the chance of new changes to the virus.
To India now, where the first batch of Covishield vaccine doses made by local partner, the Serum Institute, arrive in New Delhi ahead of a mega vaccine rollout on Saturday. Take a look.
Preparations are going on in full swing. We want to get everything ready by the morning of the 16th when the vaccination program will be starting. We will be having 10 teams in place. Each team will have 5 members, and all the other facilities are being arranged. Most of it is almost ready.
India has 4 mega depots to take delivery of the vaccines and transport them to state distribution hubs in temperature-controlled vans. But the final leg will be tough. In one recent exercise in rural Uttar Pradesh, where summer temperatures exceed 40 degrees Celsius or 105 degrees Fahrenheit, a health worker was pictured transporting boxes of dummy vials on his bicycle. In Kashmir, meanwhile, currently being pummeled by snowstorms, databases of priority groups and of staff to administer the vaccines were still being prepared last week, according to officials. Now, first to get the one of 2 vaccines granted emergency approval there will be 30 million health and other frontline workers, followed by around 270 million people aged over 50 or deemed high risk all over the vast nation. About 150,000 staff in 700 districts have been specially trained, and India has held several national dry runs involving mock transportation of vaccines and dummy injections. More than 150,000 Indians have died from the infection, and the economy is one of the worst hit worldwide, with millions losing their livelihoods.
In other news, a black box from the crashed Indonesian passenger jet has been recovered, officials said, a discovery that could offer critical clues to explaining why the plane with 62 people aboard slammed into sea. Divers just off the coast of the capital, Jakarta, hauled the jet's flight data recorder to the surface as the hunt continues for its cockpit voice recorder. Indonesian Transport Minister Budi Karya Sumadi told a live television briefing that the box had been found after the Sriwijaya Air Boeing 737-500 plunged about 10,000 feet in less than a minute before slamming into the Java Sea Saturday. A Navy ship said investigators started picking up strong signals from an area where they were searching, with divers able to retrieve the box in about an hour from the wreckage-littered seabed. So far, authorities have been unable to explain why the 26-year-old plane crashed just 4 minutes after takeoff. Black box data, which record information about the speed, altitude, and direction of the plane, as well as flight crew conversations, help explain nearly 90% of all crashes, according to aviation experts. Some 3,600 personnel are taking part in the recovery effort, assisted by dozens of boats and helicopters flying over small islands off the capital's coast. The agency deployed a remotely operated vehicle to assist the divers.
In other news, Thailand's king has visited prisons, sweeping floors alongside his official concert in the latest round of a charm offensive following unprecedented criticism of the monarchy during street protests. Take a look. Now, the palace has stepped up public appearances in recent months as the student-led movement has made calls for reforms to the monarchy, considered a taboo subject in Thailand. Images released by the palace showed King Maha Vajiralongkorn and his consort, 35-year-old Senit Wangjaripakdi, visiting different prisons over the past 2 months, dressed in jeans and polo shirts. The king has appointed Sininat to a project overseeing the health care of prison inmates, an expansion to her public portfolio after a dramatic change in her fortunes over the past year and a half. Sininat was named consort in July 2019, the first such appointment in almost a century, but was stripped off ranks and titles 3 months later, accused of disloyalty and ambition to match the position of the king's wife, Queen Suthida. Now, last September, Sininat made an unexpected comeback. The king reinstated her titles, along with a public declaration that she wasn't tarnished anymore. On Monday, the Royal Gazette announced her new public duties as a deputy advisor on a committee set up by the king focusing on prison health care.
Meanwhile, Ugandans vote Thursday in a highly charged election after one of the bloodiest campaigns in years, as veteran leader Yoweri Museveni seeks a sixth term against a singer-turned-lawmaker half his age. Bobby Wine, the 38-year-old popularly known as the ghetto president who hung up the mic to enter politics, leads the opposition field trying to unseat Museveni, a 76-year-old former rebel leader who has ruled since 1986. Some 18 million voters are registered for the presidential and parliamentary ballot, which follows a pre-election crackdown more severe than any seen in recent times, and growing signs the race has been tilted against Museveni's rivals. His opponents, most visibly Wine, who spent much of the campaign in a bulletproof vest and combat helmet, have been arrested, denied permission to rally, and seen their meetings dispersed with tear gas and supporters shot in the streets. Journalists covering opposition rallies, meanwhile, have been attacked, government critics locked up, and election monitors prosecuted, raising concerns over the transparency of the electoral process. President Yoweri Museveni, who is seeking re-election in Uganda Thursday, took power at the head of a Bush army in 1986 and has ruled ever since, making him one of the world's longest-serving leaders.
In other news, Chief Executive Carrie Lam called on the international community not to adopt double standards for the mainland and Hong Kong's internal affairs. Ahead of the Executive Council meeting, Mrs. Lam made the remarks in response to the international community's comments on the arrest of people suspected of violating the national security law. Let's listen in.
Having regard to the recent incidents that have happened in the United States. Well, when we mention about double standards being adopted by overseas officials and politicians when they commented on incidents in Hong Kong, the first double standard is the importance of national security. Why should Hong Kong not have the safeguards on national security when jurisdictions all over the world have a series of legislation to safeguard their own national security? Are they suggesting that the safety of Hong Kong people is of lesser significance and importance to the people of Hong Kong than the American citizen in an American society? So the first double standard that they have adopted is they uphold their own national security, but they at the same time belittle the need for national security in the People's Republic of China, especially in the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. The second double standard is, of course, how one would see the rule of law. The rule of law requires enforcement of the law and the keeping of law and order in a city in order to safeguard the life and property of citizens. But since June 2019, everybody has seen what has happened in Hong Kong. We have rampant violence and riots, undermining the safety of Hong Kong people, properties, and businesses. But some overseas commentators or politicians were sort of condoning or encouraging this sort of activities under the guise of democracy. But when the same thing seemed to happen in their own country, they immediately took a very different approach to condemn the violence, and some said that this was verging on sedition in American society. Now, the third double standard, of course, is respect for the judicial system. I think all over the world, if we talk about the rule of law, one of the most important fundamentals is the courts. the independence of the courts, as well as the quality of our judges. Hong Kong is very blessed to have a very distinguished judiciary supported by the very distinguished judges. And so I would really appeal, especially we have a new Chief Justice installed yesterday, I would appeal to the community at large to leave room for the courts to do their work, which is to uphold justice in Hong Kong, without fear, favor, self-interest, or deceit.
Eagle News will be right back. Stay tuned.
This portion is brought to you by Canreeve Corporation, your ventilation and air conditioning specialist. Services offered: supply and installation of elevators, escalators, air conditioners, ventilators, jet towel hand dryers, generators, access control system, factory automation and modernization. For more info, please contact Ami Kanke at 0915-263-7198 or 0998-900-3224.
Fitch Ratings retained the Philippines investment grade credit rating of BBB with a stable outlook. Take a look.
The cabinet also learned last night that credit rating agency Fitch Ratings affirms its BBB rating for the Philippines and stable outlook for its economy, as it expects us to continue bouncing back this year due to our vaccination program, due in part to our vaccination program. Ang mga ito po ay mga overview ng mga tinalakay sa gabinete sa cabinet meeting kagabi. Marami pong mga detalye ang mga ahensya na nakatutok sa mga agenda items na ito, and we will work with the concerned agencies to flesh out these details in the days to come. Mga kababayan, sa patuloy natin na pakikipagbuno sa pandemya, mga sakuna at iba pa, sa pagharap natin sa mga parating pa na mga hamon at pagsubok, kasali na dyan ang kagutuman. Kailangan nating magtulungan.
Fitch said it expects Philippine economic activity to continue to recover in the coming quarters and project GDP to expand by 6.9% and 8% in 2021 and 2022, respectively. New daily recorded COVID-19 cases have been declining in recent months, reflecting an effective government response to the crisis and reducing the risk of renewed lockdowns. It said the authorities have also engaged in multilateral initiatives and with several pharmaceutical companies to secure vaccines, with a rollout expected to start in May 2021. Fitch said the potential for a delay poses downside risks to our growth forecasts, while an effective vaccine rollout could result in a faster than expected recovery in growth.
Meanwhile, the EU regretted a new wave of U.S. tariffs on French and German products that came into force on Tuesday and said it would seek a trade truce with the incoming Biden administration. The tariffs are yet another chapter in a 16-year spat over subsidies for aircraft manufacturers Airbus and Boeing that turned increasingly sour under U.S. President Donald Trump. French exporters were hit with high tariffs on wine and cognac, while Germany saw new levies on aeronautic parts. The EU executive handles trade matters for the bloc's 27 member states. The EU said it's looking forward to engage constructively with the new U.S. administration to resolve this long-lasting dispute as part of a renewed transatlantic agenda. French wine and spirits exporters believe the new tariffs will cost the sector 1 billion euros in sales, with the cognac business especially punished.
Asian markets fluctuated Tuesday as hopes for the rollout of coronavirus vaccines and a new stimulus out of Washington competed with fears over surging infections, new lockdowns, and brewing political and social unrest in the United States. While analysts' long-term outlook remained positive as more people are inoculated and life returns to normal, frighteningly high new case numbers and deaths around the world and the resulting lockdowns kept a cap on buying. Germany's BioNTech provided some good news as it said it expected to produce 2 billion doses of its vaccine this year, up from the previous forecast of 1.3 billion, lifting hopes that more people could get the jab earlier. The main focus of attention for traders is Washington, where Democrats are pushing ahead with a historic second impeachment of Donald Trump as they accuse him of inciting Wednesday's storming of the Capitol building that delayed lawmakers' certification of Joe Biden's election win. Observers said the chances of Trump being convicted were slim, but there was a concern that the latest moves could foment more unrest. Wall Street's three main indices fell Monday, having ended last week at record highs, and Asian markets were mixed. Tokyo, Hong Kong, Mumbai, Manila, and Jakarta all rose, while Shanghai finished at a 5-year high. But Sydney, Seoul, Singapore, Taipei, and Wellington fell. London, Paris, and Frankfurt all rose soon after opening.
And thousands of Ford workers gathered outside THC Kamacari plant in Bahia State in northeastern Brazil after the car maker Ford said it would close its 3 factories in Brazil this year as the coronavirus epidemic exacerbated already slow sales in South America. The car maker terminated some 5,000 jobs. Losses continued despite progress made in phasing out unprofitable products, which included exiting the heavy truck business, cutting costs, and launching new products. The COVID-19 pandemic, said the company, amplifies persistent industry idle capacity and slow sales that have resulted in years of significant losses. Ford would continue serving South America with cars sourced from Argentina, Uruguay, and other markets. It said car sales dropped 28.57% and that of buses by 33%. The closures will incur one-off charges of about $4.1 billion, according to Ford. The news came as a bombshell in recession-hit Brazil, which is battling record unemployment, and elicited criticism of the inability of Jair Bolsonaro's government to create a favorable business environment. Ford opened its first factory in Brazil in 1921 in Sao Paulo to produce 4,700 automobiles and 360 tractors per year.
Twitter announced that it has suspended more than 70,000 accounts linked to the QAnon conspiracy theory following the attack on the U.S. Capitol by a mob of President Donald Trump's supporters. Given the violent events in Washington, D.C. and increased risk of harm, we began permanently suspending thousands of accounts that were primarily dedicated to sharing QAnon content on Friday afternoon, Twitter said in a blog post. Since Friday, more than 70,000 accounts have been suspended as a result of our efforts, it said, with many instances of a single individual operating numerous accounts.
Malacanang has directed the National Telecommunications Commission, or NTC, to immediately impose sanctions on internet service providers, or ISPs, that allowed their platforms to be used for online child exploitation. In a virtual press briefing, Cabinet Secretary Cardon Nograles said the rise of cases of online sexual abuse and exploitation of children during the pandemic has caught the attention of President Duterte. Take a look.
The Department of Justice, particularly the DOJ Interagency Council Against Trafficking, or IACAT. It has been discovered, however, that the pandemic has contributed to or even been used and taken advantage of as we see the disturbing rise of online sexual exploitation cases in the country, the victims of which have a median age of only 11 years old. Nakakabahala po ang numero. Suspicious transaction reports related to online sexual exploitation during the pandemic more than doubled. From 19,000 in 2019, it has now ballooned to 47,937 in 2020. To address this, the government is adopting the recommendations of the Department of Justice, which are as follows. First, to direct the NTC to immediately impose sanctions on internet service providers, or ISPs, for failure to fulfill their duties under Republic Act 9775. These duties, may we remind the ISPs, include, number 1, immediately notifying the PNP or NBI within 7 days upon knowledge thereof that its server or facility is being used for child pornography. Number 2, preserving evidence for purpose of investigation and prosecution. Number 3, furnishing particulars of users involved in child pornography. And number 4, most importantly for the ISPs, installing available technology to intercept or immediately block access to child porn. Second, to issue an executive order that will pave the way for, number 1, the strengthened cooperation between IACAT, the Interagency Council Against Child Pornography, and other relevant agencies. Number 2, the formulation of a case management protocol. And number 3, the streamlining of online sexual exploitation information dissemination efforts to be headed by the PCOO. Pangatlo, and we call on Congress for this, to certify as priority the passage of bills pending in Congress to amend Anti-Trafficking in Persons Act that, number 1, exempt trafficking in persons from the anti-wiretapping law. Number 2, to broaden the membership of the IACAT. And number 3, to impose obligations on ISPs and tourism establishments, all in the effort for us to destroy child pornography in the Philippines. Pang-apat, to strengthen the IACAT by providing plantilla positions and additional funding. Malinaw po na hindi hahayaan ng gobyerno na madagdagan pa ang biktima ng sexual exploitation sa gitna ng kinakaharap nating pandemya.
Eagle News will be right back. Don't go away.
This portion is brought to you by Kubert, an expert in air conditioning and electromechanical. Also engaged in structural, electrical, fire protection, plumbing, and sanitary services. Kubert, your ultimate MEPS and air conditioning solutions.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, Gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon, hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
Welcome back to the news. Masks that helped save lives during the coronavirus pandemic are proving a deadly hazard for wildlife, with birds and marine creatures ensnared in the staggering number of discarded facial coverings littering animal habitats. Watch this.
We think that both masks and gloves. So we think that both masks and gloves are likely to pose a threat to marine wildlife. Gloves are probably confused by animals like sea turtles as food, as jellyfish, which is their primary food. The entirety of the food web is essentially at risk here because when those plastics break down in the environment, they form smaller and smaller particles, and those particles then can impact pretty much the entirety of the food web, from the smallest animals to the largest animals.
Can be sport. Wang Shanjun, a Tai Chi master in Beijing, hopes people all over the world will now practice Tai Chi after the martial art entered the UNESCO Intangible Cultural Heritage List at the end of 2020. Tai Chi, a centuries-old martial art originally designed for the battlefield, is now often seen as a form of physical exercise practiced by people in China in streets or parks. Take a look.
中国的太极终于走上世界了，这是我们的骄傲，是我们每一个中国人都感到中国的传统文化越来越被世界接受，所以我们感到非常高兴，非常自豪。
I'm associating it with flow yoga. I find it very graceful. I want to learn it. Let's do that here. Let's get an instructor and let's do that here.
Okay.
Well, that's it for tonight's broadcast. Thank you so much for joining us. I am CJ Hero. We'll see you again tomorrow.
And at the end of the day, there remains so much more to be grateful for. I'm Alma Angeles, and
we live in interesting times.